A very good evening to all of you. I welcome you to the third session of the ICFC interview series, What's Editing Anyway? And today we will have Priya Talwar in conversation with Anupam and Priyanka. So, over to you, Priya.
Thank you, Vivek. Welcome everyone to the show called What's Editing Anyway. The idea behind this show, if I can just quickly say, is that to out loud about editing and editors in a way that's candid, in a way that's funny, in a way that's humane. And we've had two episodes so far. This is our third episode, and we have something a little special, a little different this time. So I'd like to first thanks to Vivek and Mundugraj for allowing us to do this chatty conversation sort of a show. Today we have two guests. We have a professional editor and we have someone who's a professional, like-minded person. She's not an editor per se, but I am very, very sure and keen to hear what she has to say about really what's editing anyway. So first I'd like to introduce Anupam Chaudhary, who is an editor, writer, blogger with over 12 years of experience in academic editing. He was previously the head of editorial services of the academic division of OUP, Oxford University Press, India. Priyanka Padi is an assistant professor at the Department of Psychology, Lady Shriram College for Women, Delhi University. I'd like to dive in, Priyanka. I've told Anupama a little bit about the format of the show, and I've told you a little bit as well. But I really want to start with you. I have a few questions. Unlike the first episode, they're not rapid fire, but it's going to probably break the ice, right? So, tell us a myth about editors or editing that you believed in but got dispelled.
You asked a myth about editors or editing?
Yeah, something that you believed in that was a myth but later got dispelled.
Okay, so I'll be honest about this, that I think initially I did think that editing is essentially about just being a professional nitpick. You have to find faults in other people's work. You have to poke holes into what other people have done. And you have to just sit there and say, well, this is wrong and this is wrong. I think that is a perspective that has changed over the years, having observed the process very closely and seen what it does actually to a manuscript to go through that entire process. I think that's a myth that has definitely broken for me. It is not about finding faults and it is not about poking holes. It's actually about creating something really beautiful, and I think that's a myth that has gone for me.
Thank you so much for your honesty. I hope Anupam has given you any answers. Okay. So the next question is a little more detailed. Describe three things that would make for a good editor, for a strong editor. Could be any three, could be quality, could be anything specific.
Okay, so I think somebody who has the capacity to pay attention to detail, to be detail oriented, is something that I think definitely helps a professional editor. Somebody who has the ability to keep a macro view and not have a micro view, who is not just the two things that I'm saying are actually quite opposing to each other. That on the one hand you need to have attention to detail, but on the other hand you should also have the capacity to zoom out and be able to step back and look at the macro picture of the product, and be mindful of that. And third, of course, is I think something that I anyway hold very important as a personal value, that you have to have great work ethic, you have to be persevering, and you have to be sincere in what you do. I think that's something which is very important, regardless of what you are doing.
So before the interview, Priyanka and I were talking, and she was talking about similar things, and I told her, you are really the ideal author. This third question is, describe three things that make for a poor or a weak editor.
Okay, so I think definitely language skills are at play here. Somebody who doesn't have a complete grasp over the language skills themselves is definitely not a suitable candidate for editing. Again, somebody who doesn't really work well with people, because a whole lot of editing is about understanding the perspective of the other, to be able to step into their shoes and see what is it that they are trying to communicate through their work. Again, it doesn't matter what work it is, but whatever it is that they are trying to communicate, that needs to shine through ultimately. So if you don't have that capacity, then that's definitely a challenge. And the third challenge I would say is, again, somebody who just doesn't have a good work ethic, somebody who's not able to stick to deadlines, not able to really deliver what they have promised. I think that definitely that's again, doesn't matter what work you're doing, it's going to be a barrier, it's going to be an impediment, surely.
Okay, so we have a few more questions, but I want, Anupam, after this question and answer ends, I want you to certainly, dive right back in. If you want to bring up something that she said, something you found poignant or interesting, definitely, take a mental note so that we can also sum it up in our own ways. So the next question is, Priyanka, what is the sound advice that your husband has given you as a professional editor? Something that stuck with you and you still kind of use today as a researcher, scholar, and writer.
Okay, so that's an interesting one, because I think there are many. I must have lost count over the years about what all I have received from him in terms of input about academic writing. I think there is one thing that where we actually, our approaches are quite different. I tend to be too elaborative, too expansive in my writing, and he has this uncanny ability to say a whole lot of things in the minimum amount of words. And I think that's something that he's really helped me with. My sentences are a lot less long-winded, much more succinct, and I think I would thank him for that.
That's brilliant. Okay, the next question is slightly similar. Sound advice that any person has given you when it comes to your writing, your work, not necessarily a professional editor, could have been a friend, and similarly, something that stuck, something that you can.
Again, the same point actually. This is Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath, who was the principal of ex-principal of Lady Shri Ram College now. Excellent orator. In one of her speeches, she said, and I think she was quoting somebody, I've forgotten whom she was quoting, and she said that if I had more time, I would write you a shorter letter. So again, the point about just saying exactly what you need to and being very concise about what you have to say. I think that's again a brilliant piece of advice for all academic writers.
This was it. This was it. Oh, sorry. There's one more, and this is something that we'll talk about in depth, possibly in the second part of the show. Is that when was the last time you felt like you were an imposter? Like you felt like you don't really know what you're doing, but you're still doing it any which way. Like try and be specific.
A heartbeat ago. That's a constant feeling, and I think I don't know. I think it has its pros and cons. Reflexivity is something that we talk about a lot in research. That your capacity to be looking inwards, your capacity to be self-examining, and I think with that comes a great degree of self-doubt. So that's something that I feel throughout the day, every single day. Thanks to the fact that I'm also doing my PhD right now, and that's a process which is filled with imposter moments. So just a heartbeat away is what I would say.
Okay, great. I think Anupam, we should, start from here itself. Like I know that we had quite a few points in mind that we want to talk about, but because we're ending the first part here at the imposter syndrome, I'd like to ask you, the same question, and I can also share my experience. Try and be specific, when was the last time you felt like, I'm doing it, but do I really know it?
So this morning I sent out an email to a client, and in that email, it was basically an answer to a question. And in that answer, I was trying to advise the client about something. And in that advice, I was thinking, am I qualified enough to give that advice? And it was not about editing. Frankly, it wasn't about editing, but it was about editorial operations. And those are something that I have managed a lot. But yet I was feeling a kind of a feeling of self-doubt, whether I should be telling that to him at all or not. But anyway, I usually try and suppress that self-doubt. It's only in the language that I have started changing the way I speak vis-a-vis my imposter syndrome. So that was the recent one that has happened. Yeah.
Tell you, because I have a feeling, everyone here, the participants, they would have felt it, and it just helps to say it out loud. The people who are, supposedly the subject, the interview and the interviewer, they're also, equally human. So I'll quickly share an incident where I was speaking with an author. I'd spoken to him for hundreds of hours, and we were just talking, wrapping up some stuff for an interview, and I could literally imagine myself like another Priya sitting right next to me, and the one who's the real me, I could feel, like, what are you doing? You have no idea. And the other one is sitting like, this is what you do. He doesn't know it. He needs your help. Therefore, you really know what you're doing. So it was
Yeah.
kind of an insightful moment, but I would still say that it doesn't really go away anywhere.
Yeah.
The only
So I feel that the profession in which we are into, that is something that gives the rise to imposter syndrome more easily. See, our job is to be close to perfection as much as possible. So what happens is that we have to be accurate, we have to be timely, we have to be on the dot all the time. So what happens is that compared to jobs where you have to literally faff through your life, you just have to, BS your way through. Our job depends on being correct 99.99% of the time. And when you know that you have to be that accurate, you automatically have feelings of self-doubt. Am I being correct? Am I saying the right thing? So that is where I think our common feeling comes through.
I want to ask you, Priyanka, you've just heard us talk about it, and you specifically heard Anupam, who's worked on your copy. You just heard him say this. So what is your immediate reaction, like knowing someone who's worked on your work, who's, contributed in terms of value, in terms of removing errors. And when you hear him say that, like, if you've not discussed it before with him, like, what is your immediate reaction? Because you're also the author, and we as editors would also like to know, that do authors understand that we're as humane? Do we understand that authors are equally humane?
Yeah. So to me, actually, this is something which is, this is something that I would expect naturally, in the sense that we are all human beings here. So it is refreshing for me. It is perfectly acceptable for me to know that anyone who's working with me on a particular project also has a certain degree of self-doubt. I'm not the only one here who's feeling, shaky about things. It's perfectly natural to feel that way. And I think we have to accept whatever we bring to the table with that understanding that the other person will also have a certain degree of self-doubt. But I think the beauty of it is if you are able to come together, but then also able to bolster each other's courage and confidence. I think that would really be a nice pairing. That is what I would look for in an editor whom I am working with. If I can feel confident in what he brings to the table and he can be confident about what I'm bringing in, I think that would be a beautiful marriage.
Okay, I'd like to move to the second part, but I would also like to say one more thing here, that the point you're saying also connects very well with one of the points you said in the question that I asked. Describe 3 things that would make for a strong editor. You said that the person has to understand people essentially, right? But I mean, in that sense, where an editor understands, managing relationships, understands communication very well, that will obviously happen after going through several, making several mistakes, etc. But I still feel that in our ecosystem, where the networks and communities are still growing for Indian freelance editors specifically, I think it's probably just on us to, to say these things out loud, to share specific experiences, and especially people who've been there, done that, so that the younger ones feel a little more confident, feel a little less afraid of stumbling, because everyone will make mistakes and different kinds of mistakes. So it's important to be able to manage relationships. But even then, in the absence of an ecosystem or maybe a small support system, how would that happen? But I can say that, let's try and also use this platform itself to do that, because
Absolutely.
have so many young editors joining the group and they have questions, but I sometimes do feel that they're probably afraid to ask a little more authentic questions.
No, I think these are certain things that we have to, grab the bull by the horn. There's no point in having. So if we have self-doubt, and it's best to just come out with our self-doubts in front of people who are part of this community, and this is a great platform to do that.
Yes, I would invite, all the participants to keep their questions, just take a mental note for any question on this topic, but we will be moving to the next one. Anupam and I have been talking on and off before the interview began, and there were several interesting things, but of course we can only talk about a few of them. I want, Anupam to really take the stage and tell us something very specific. Anupam, you were talking about how, your experience as a software coder helps you as an editor. This is something
Okay.
that sounds really fascinating to me, and we spoke about it very recently. Before
Yeah.
you dive in, I would like to, share one very specific question so that you can, also think it through. Is that what would you say is the most important thing you have learned as a coder that you can today and do use as an editor?
Okay. So I will remember that specific question. I'll shape my answer around it. Uh, First of all, I will try and talk about what coding is. Okay. Now, what happens in coding is that you are going to ask someone to do something. It's as simple as that. You are going to ask the computer to do something and provide you with something. Now, you just try to understand how I'm breaking down the first statement into smaller sentences. Okay, sorry, smaller steps. So now you're going to ask the computer to do something. To be able to ask to the computer to do something, both of you have to learn the same language, and that language is the programming language. Once you learn the language, you can tell the computer to do things. Now, okay, in Microsoft Word, you click and drag a word, a specific sentence, and then click on the bold button, and the lettering on the screen becomes bold. But have you imagined how many different, or how many, the number of programming instructions that are happening behind the screen, what is happening in the background? So what happens is that an event is triggered, a program is triggered, a set of instructions is triggered, which ensures that the thing that you see on your screen becomes bolder and blacker. Okay. Now, once you have learned how to speak to the computer, the next thing comes in is understanding that computer is not going to understand your language the way you naturally speak. So then comes in the idea of algorithms. So whatever instructions or whatever you tell the computer is created in the form of algorithms. For instance, when I'm talking to anybody, so I'm talking to you guys. If I say talking to you guys, I am, it sounds odd. Suppose I say talking guys, I am to, or you, or something like that. If the structure of the sentence is completely, jumbled up, you will not be able to understand anything. Similarly, every instruction that is given to a computer has to be in a specific structure, a specific step-by-step manner. And that is called the algorithm. So for instance, I was telling you yesterday the example of making tea. Now, making tea is like, okay, fine, put tea into hot water, that is fine. But how are you going to tell a robot to make tea? You will have to break down the entire process into really minute steps. Okay. Now focus on this thing about breaking down things into minute steps. Now, that is something, first of all, breaking down a complex set of instructions or complex idea into smaller steps, and then transmitting it in a very logical manner is what computer programming teaches you. That is what coding is essentially. Now, once you get a grip over that kind of skill and that kind of training, when you become an editor, what happens is that when you pick up something like the Chicago Manual of Style, it is full of standards. Now, one thing that I learned very early on is that if you focus too much on memorizing the standard and not enough on why that standard exists, then you will not be able to retain it. Furthermore, you will not be able to pick up newer standards, newer grammar rules, newer language rules. One part of language which has to do with grammar and usage is extremely logical. So when you're editing, what happens is that the more logical you are in terms of working in terms of usage patterns and grammar rules and style rules, the easier it is for you to become an editor, the better you will perform. So now, connecting my background as a coder and my abilities as an editor, what is common and what really helps is to look at things with the minutest level of logic. And logic is something that is very, very essential to become any kind of editor, especially if you are an academic editor. Does that more or less answer the question?
Yes, 100%. I also want to, Priyanka to, dive in. And so when he's talking about, using this analogy and saying how his experience as a coder helps him edit, you as an author, like, have you ever imagined, like, this is the person who thinks in this particular manner, has worked on my copy, and then how does that translate into your, your experience as an author? What do you really feel about this? Like, have you thought about this?
Well, yes, too many times actually, but that also speaks to the person he is in general. I think he's somebody who's extremely logic driven, regardless of what work he's doing, whether he's a coder or he's an editor, he brings the same kind of logical ability to everything that he does. And it could be, like he said, it could be making tea in the kitchen, and he would approach it with the same kind of, attention to detail and being very, very step by step about it, and so on. So yes, of course, it's something that I have noticed in all the work that he does, including any editing that he has done for me, anything that I have written. It's difficult to appreciate that as an author, because you feel that your work is being sort of torn apart. And also because, I'll admit this, that as somebody who's written something, you also tend to have a lot of probably, for the lack of a better word, some sort of an attachment to what you have created, and you feel that it's perfection the way it is, much like a parent would about a baby that they have made themselves. But then you realize that no, the baby can actually be improved by certain interventions, and there is schooling which helps the baby, and there is grandparenting which helps the baby, and so on and so forth. And similarly, your perfect manuscript is also helped by an editing intervention which has been carried out well. So I'm not saying that all editorial intervention would necessarily improve the manuscript, but if it has been carried out well, it definitely improves the product that you have created. And while the process may be painful for an author to observe, and also the number of questions that are involved, you start feeling as an author that, did I do anything right, or did I just get everything wrong? And you can imagine how that triggers the self-doubt part and the imposter syndrome part. So it's very difficult to sit through that time when he's going through something that I have written, because I know he's going to come up with 1,000 questions, and I'm going to feel like I've really not done what I should have done. But if you stay with the process, and if you have the patience and also the tolerance for being torn apart and then being put together, then yes, then you will find something beautiful by the end of it.
So now we know what Anupam has done to your works.
I am yet to do any major work on her thesis, but yeah, I have edited papers for her in the past.
But I'm very glad, Priyanka, I'm very glad for you to, say it in a very honest manner, is that on one hand, it does feel like as an author, because you're so attached, it's your baby. When you see the questions, the track changes, what is it that you immediately feel like? Because I've seen, when I've given my edits to my author, until that time I'm freaking out. But when I submit it, I feel relieved. But I also know from that day onwards, I'm still anxious, because I know my author is going to start feeling, discouraged, even though that was not the intention. I always see this gap, with every author, especially with beginner. Of course, someone who's been edited like for years, he or she would less likely to feel that the process itself is so painful. But especially with beginning authors, it is really on us to, to close this gap. And I tell my authors, just tell me how you feel. Because I know for a debut author to see track changes, and on top of that, comments that in my case are detailed. So I worry that maybe I should just, two copies. One is with track changes, one is with comments. Because I know any which way the author will feel, and that feeling is very important. The author feels like, what did I do right? Not that you did everything right. We try to make sure that there's nothing visibly wrong, or even if it's invisible to the most lay person. My idea is really to talk about how do we, if we have to be good at managing relationships, how we as community can close this gap, where authors don't feel that we are here to sabotage, because that's one of the most dominant myths that I remember. Once I was talking to this very young poet, very young man. So I told him that I'm an editor, and he said, but I'm sure, but what if you just change the meaning of what I'm trying to say? And I laughed, because that's the opposite of what we do, right? We can't read what you're trying to say. But my point, I'll just quickly come back to, is that it is really on us to close that gap. And because you hear the more, you hear the author tell us on when, instances where you were made to feel comfortable by the editor, or even if you want to share other instances where the editor was unable to make you feel, like, I'm your aide, I'm your friend, and I'm not your enemy here to sabotage your project.
I think that's a very good approach that you are talking about, Priya. That authors also need that reassurance, and I think it's a very good thing that we started by talking about this whole feeling of imposter syndrome and self-doubt. And I think even very seasoned authors who've been in the field for several years could experience that. And this entire process of putting your work through a whole lot of, it has to go through a whole lot of scrutiny through the entire scientific community. That's actually nerve-wracking, right? So if the editor or whoever is the editorial team, if they could approach that a little more humanely and also understand that, yes, the author is bringing in a very different kind of expertise to the project, they will probably not. So let's start with the assumption that their language skills will not be great, because they are not in this for language skills. They could be in this for their scientific acumen. They could be in this for something entirely different. So for instance, if it is somebody from, say, archaeology, or somebody from nutrition, then language is not their forte. And therefore, the editor needs to know that when you are talking to them, then condescension is something which should really be kept out of the equation altogether. And you have to first start by telling the person that you really appreciate what knowledge addition they have done to their discipline, the fact that they have researched on a particular thing or written on a particular phenomenon or a particular issue. Start by appreciating that, because the person needs to hear that. After that, they would be ready to collaborate with you, and then it's okay for you to slowly start introducing the idea that what we have here is good, but this can be made much better. And for that to happen, we will have to sort of, look at it very minutely. We will have to, in a way, we will have to disassemble it before we can assemble it back together. And as an author, would you be okay with that? I have a feeling if you approach it that way, most people would be reasonable enough, because like I said, it's not as if we are very sure of what we have created. We are actually having a whole lot of doubt and a whole lot of palpitation about the whole thing. So if you say that this can be made better, most people would actually agree to that, but it has to be approached in that tone. If you just, send out a document with track changes and thousands of those, then that can be very defeating. And some people, especially, they may actually completely swear off research and say, well, never again. I'm not getting into this ever again. It's too difficult a process to go through, right? So I think the tone and the approach makes all the difference.
Very true. And I think that's what, so in the last, say, 30 minutes, we've spoken about a couple of things. We've spoken about Anupam's experience as a software coder and also as an editor. We've spoken about the imposter syndrome, whether it's an editor, whether it's an author. But I really want to, also try and say that this show is really, it's not about talking only about editing, the nitty-gritties of it. It's really trying to open up a healthy space for a dialogue that's very candid, very honest, and where we can feel, like we're comfortable talking about these things, because I really think editors really have not taken it upon themselves to talk about these things as much as it should have, and especially to the audience who is not an editor. So it could be an author, someone who needs an edit, or maybe someone who doesn't really needs it and may not even need it. So the purpose of this whole conversation is really just for the people who are coming in, joining in later, is to really to make it a very frank conversation about what is it that we really do, and maybe be honest and say that, hey, it's not that big a deal anyway, like it's a regular thing for all of us. The next part of the show is something that we also talked about, but I want to talk about something else. So when you're talking about the use of logic, Anupam, I had a question. I was also thinking about this. So I thought about how, as an editor, you have to use your intuition, you have to use your emotional intelligence, you have to make the author feel comfortable, like Priyanka is talking. So as a coder, were you able to use any of those? Like, do you use intuition, do you use emotional intelligence, or is it really purely logic?
See, computers don't care about emotional intelligence or intuition. So as far as coding is concerned and your interaction with a software platform is concerned, you don't need to worry about emotional intelligence or intuition. You just have to ensure that your logic is solid. You are absolutely 100%. That in computer coding, it cannot be 99.9%. It has to be 100%. You are 100% correct in the instructions that you give to the computer. The language has to be correct, the instructions have to be correct, the code has to be correct. But what happens is, if you have been coding for a long time, what happens is that the accumulation of knowledge, the accumulation of all the wisdom within you, in your guts, it becomes what you start calling intuition. For instance, I'll tell you, when I was a project lead and there were around 15 programmers under me, somebody will come and say that, sir, this is the problem that I'm having. This is my code is not working. I just ask them, what is the error that your code is throwing? So they would say, this is the error that the code is throwing. Then I'll tell him exactly where they have made which mistake in the entire series of code. That is where your experience becomes intuition. In a way, it becomes the accumulation of knowledge becomes a kind of a wisdom where you don't have to think. It just comes from your guts that, okay, if this is the error, then this must be the problem. Similarly, it happens with when you're editing. If you've been editing for a long time, so whenever there is a language issue that the author commits, language error that the author commits very frequently, almost instinctively, you know, okay, these are the things I need to fix, or these are the things that I need to tell the author to fix so that this doesn't happen in the future. So in coding, intuition is not used as much as you would think when it comes to, you know, human relations. But in editing, yes, intuition is very, very important. Emotional intelligence is more important when I feel when you're interacting with your colleagues, with your clients. At that point of time, it is extremely important, because of course there are two or three different parts of your business. One part of your business is you working with the Word document or whatever document you're working on, and the other part is pure business, talking to your client, negotiating rates, explaining errors, eliciting responses, a lot of such communication things. So in those things, emotional intelligence is extremely important. And in some cases, the client will stick to you only because of your ability to manage his anxieties or his, to be able to communicate what is in it for him or what will benefit him to him in a more palatable manner. So communication skills are very important there.
I'm so glad you said that. Okay, we'll move to the next part. We spoke about another very interesting thing, is that you spoke about how, you as a person like to think through things, whether it is as a professional or even otherwise in life. And you said that you have a fundamental approach towards, which is that, with the approach really you said is, the binary you talk about, central, what is needful versus, what is desirable.
Yeah.
So I want you to, I know that you have mentioned it to me, but I still want you to tell us specifically, especially the audience, the viewers.
Yes.
The last important decision you made could be work related, could be even, non-work, where this was the, the groundwork, the concept was this, and then you used it to make that decision. And from there on, you can tell us, how you evolved it or how you arrived at it, and whether you arrived at it when you were working as a coder or maybe only when you started to, edit.
No, I first of all, okay. First, I'll tell you that I arrived at it when I was working at Sage Publications and I was a production editor, and I was writing a lot of blurbs and a book marketing copy, which we also call blurbs. So along with that, of course, I was also editing, doing a lot of copy editing, doing a lot of production editing. And at that point of time, I came up with this framework, decision-making framework, which involves 4 quadrants. On one side, you have essential versus desirable, and on the other side, you have the central versus peripheral. Now, just to explain to the audience here, so if you are in a situation where you want to choose between alternatives, or if you want to take an action, or you want to go in a particular direction, so and this framework that I'm talking about can apply to all kinds of things in your life. So when you are in a dilemma kind of a situation where you are, or in a situation where you are stuck and you are not able to move forward, so you have to ask yourself, is something that in front of me essential or desirable to my goals? So for instance, I'll take this example. I cannot think of something because this thing has, this framework is so internalized in me that I cannot think of a specific example which was recent. But I'll give the example of writing copy or even writing LinkedIn posts. Now, for example, LinkedIn posts are limited to 1300 characters. Okay. Now, normally my posts, when I write them in a free flow manner, they come up to more than 3000, 4000 characters, maybe even longer. Now, what do I do to ensure that everything comes within 1300 characters? Then I start reading the whole thing, the whole story, and start taking out things based on this this formula. Is this particular story element that I want to put, is it essential or desirable to the goal of what I want to communicate to the reader? So if I think that it is essential, I keep it. If I think it's desirable, I just remove it. Similarly, there are embellishments in the text. There are embellishments of words, of structures, of story elements or events that are absolutely peripheral to the main story. So, for instance, in Aesop's fables, there is something called the moral of the story. So, if it is not central to the moral of your story and it is just peripheral, then I remove it. Okay. Now, if I have space, then I'll keep it. But if I don't have space, then I'll remove it. So in the end, what happens is that even if then I'm not able to meet the word limit or the character limit, I will start choosing between one essential and the other essential. Between the two essentials, whichever is more essential, I'll keep it, then I'll reject the other thing. So similarly, when you're writing an email to a client, when you're negotiating terms, and there is a bit of a push and pull, then you think about, okay, I am arguing in favor of this and I am arguing in favor of this, but of the two, which can I let go of so that the client can give me the more important thing? Okay, that is something that you have to think again. Is it essential or desirable? You can use this formula in literally everything that you do in your life. I mean, you're going to do some shopping, you're doing online shopping, and you think to yourself, do I really need it? Is it essential or is it desirable? And then based on your budget, you can always think, okay, fine, it's desirable, let me not buy it. I'd rather buy a better laptop or something like that because it's essential to my work, that kind of thing. And in other instances, in editing, very easily, the essential versus desirable and the central versus peripheral things come in from the point of view of what you focus on when you are editing. So for instance, when you're editing a long piece of text, and so I edit in different passes. In first pass, I remove all the so what you call pre-editing tasks. So I remove all those tasks. So for instance, if I have a large piece of text and I have very less time, then I'll focus on what is essential and what is desirable and focus on the essential part so that I deliver the best copy or best edited copy to the client as possible, rather than wasting my time on things that are absolutely peripheral and it doesn't actually add a lot of value to the text. So that is how I have used this this decision-making framework in my work.
I'm glad you're saying this, but I'm also not happy because you're saying this right before the biggest online sales that are coming up. So the whole thing, what's desirable and what's not, just changes.
So that is why I said, if you have your budget ready, then don't worry too much about it. Just cram in a little more of the content. So it's fine.
Okay, so we'll be opening the floor for questions, and we can use the chat box, or if anyone wants to, switch on their video and, unmute themselves. But before that, I want to ask Priyanka, through the conversation, you've heard you've heard Anupam's point of view. You're probably, of course, familiar with it a little bit already. But I want to ask you again that, what do you think would happen if we were to really humanize more these conversations between, authors and editors? And do you really see them happening? And now that you're seeing it, what are your really, honest thoughts on this?
So I think this interaction has really been very pleasant, and it's really been eye-opening for me in certain ways. I honestly did not know before this that there were platforms like this where editors were making a deliberate attempt to humanize the process and to actually deliberate over and think, sort of reflect into whether the process is humane enough or not. Because I thought that the entire process is so technicalities driven, and the attention must be so much on actually just refining the product and taking it to the finishing line, that I never gave the field enough credit to think about the fact that they are actually thinking about these software elements. So congratulations to you guys that you guys are doing this, and you are actually thinking about making the process better for authors and for all concerned. So I think that's a definite win, and that's very encouraging and motivating for me to know. And I think I'll be more open-minded. The ripple effect of this is that it travels across. Everybody who's a stakeholder in the process starts feeling more heartened by it. The fact that the other person is actually trying to humanize this, to make this easier on everybody, I think that's something which is encouraging for everybody who's involved. So that's really a pleasant discovery for me from today's conversation.
I have to say, as I said, as I told you yesterday, you are really the ideal author, because for all of us, I can speak on the behalf of everyone and say that, the most important thing that you have to have between you and your author is friction. Without that, I don't know, it would eventually result in a fruitful, productive, maybe project or whatever. But I understand what you're saying, and I hope that there is a ripple effect. It does travel and pass down. So we have questions coming up. Anupam, you have a question from Divya. Do you want to take that?
Just a sec. Divya asked, Anupam, you spoke about shopping. If the current sale is offering a deal about a laptop that you have been eyeing on for a long time, but it comes in desirable category and not in the essential category, of course not. I'll not buy it if it is in the desirable category. I already have a laptop. So nothing is going to stop if I do not buy the laptop. So I will not buy it if it is desirable. So on the other hand, so for instance, Priyanka's current laptop is becoming slow, and I hate working on slow machines. So I've been asking her, why don't you change it? If I had been in a place, I would have changed it. But for her, in her matrix of decision making, it is not essential yet. So she will probably not buy it. But if I am asked to buy a desirable thing, I will not buy a desirable thing unless it is for somebody else.
Oh. That is not fair. A computer engineer has to have a good laptop if he is looking for one.
Well,
you deserve a good laptop. Please buy it for yourself.
Okay, fine. I think I should buy it for her. Divya is saying we should buy a laptop. Thank you, Divya.
You have one more question, Anupam. If someone has asked you, can you explain how and when you entered editing? Because you were a software coder.
This was in the year 1999. I started doing a course on website design and development. So at that point of time, a part of the course was JavaScript. And JavaScript is basically very basic coding, and it is very similar to Java. And then in the year 2000, I moved on to Java-based programming. I learned Java language, and I was programming on JSPs, servlets, enterprise Java beans. And I was actually making very technical e-commerce websites based on JSPs. So it was a couple of decades ago. It was a long time ago. But I should tell you guys that I still use my coding skills to program macros in Word. I create macros myself, as well as take Paul Beverly's macros and customize it for my own use. Make small tweaks here and there. If there is something that is very complex, the internet is full of macros. I just download it and try and install it and make small, changes to suit my requirements. And that I can do because I can understand how the code works. I don't need to learn the language because macros are coded in VBA, Visual Basic Language, which I don't know. But when I see the language, like for instance, I'm an Odia, but I can understand a bit of, say, Bengali. They are related languages, but they are different. So I can see the elements which are similar and I tweak them and use them. So that coding is something that has not gone out of my life. It is still there.
I have a related question. Do you think this is useful for you because of your specialization? Had you not been, working on academic editing, do you think it could have still helped you had you not been, an academic editor? Like, what if you were, say, trade?
Knowing how to work with macros is most useful for proofreaders and copy editors and not for development editors per se. Okay. So proofreaders and copy editors have to do a lot of cleanup work. And those works are absolutely very manual. Many things are absolutely very tedious. And when you have macros help you remove all that tedium and automate a lot of time. Macros help you automate a lot of work. So that is where it helps. If you are a development editor, macros can help you value add. So for instance, I have a macro to extract all the comments from a Word document and create a author query document. Okay. And that's a very simple macro. And that is something a development editor can also use. So macros, frankly, a lot of people in the financial sector use Excel macros to automate a lot of their work. So macros can be used across the board by everybody. It's not something that only somebody who's a copy editor can and should use. But yes, in our context, it is more useful for copy editors and proofreaders.
Good to know. I am happy to have more questions, but I'm not honestly hearing any. So there's one more thing that we can talk about because we have a little bit of time. I think this is just something that I'm personally fascinated with. Is we were talking about this, Anupam and I, is, in the context of where he was saying that, he likes to think through things. And for instance, he gave the example of a post on LinkedIn, which is X number of characters, and how he has to bring it down if his original post was longer. And we were talking about this in the context of writing book blurbs. And I said that, this is the most fascinating and yet challenging thing one gets to do, especially when you're on the desk as a journalist, because what happens is reporters will file your copy. And that at that stage, it's not a story. What a reporter really gives you is everything he has gathered from the ground, from speaking with several, sources. What you have to do is you have to look at that jumbled up data, and in one sentence, before you even begin the edit, you have to write down in one sentence what is your story. You could do it as a writer, as a novelist, as a screenplay writer, but this works the best. Like every writer, like I tell them, just tell me what is your story in one sentence. If you nail it, then half your troubles are like just, they just really dissolve. They won't go away, but they really dissolve. And that is something we were talking about. And so we thought maybe we could share a few blurbs. Of course, that I don't think we have the time, but this is really something, that it's also very useful in marketing copy. It's useful not just as a writer and an editor, but really otherwise in any profession, especially today where you have to have good copy, intelligent copy, to grab the viewer, consumer, user, anyone.
Yeah. So the copy is basically, the copy part, what we do with related to copy is kind of a sister of editing. Okay. We do copy editing, and then there is copywriting. I also do copywriting. There is copywriting and there is copy editing. The purpose of both is the same, and that is transmission of meaning. Now, in the transmission of meaning, what a copywriter does is put together all the ideas in one place. But what a copy editor do in the transmission of meaning is, I'll give you an analogy, and this is where I will focus on, the theme of this your series. What is editing anyway? Now, if you talk about editing or say what we edit is content, text. Okay. If you think of content as a knife, okay, The job of the editor is to ensure that the knife is the sharpest that it can be. Okay. So now if a chef comes to you and says that, okay, this is my knife and you are the editor, what can you do? So I'll ask him, what are you going to cut? Are you going to cut a tomato? Or are you going to cut a steel wire? So then he or she will say that, okay, I want to cut a steel wire. And then I will go on task at that and say, okay, fine, this is the kind of work I will do, and sharpen the text, sharpen the content so good that your audience understands exactly what you want to convey. And that is the basic reason of existence of editors, to ensure that the meaning of the author is transmitted to the reader in the most accurate and or the most impactful manner possible. So for instance, I say the three main characteristics of editing is precision, impact, and grace. These are the three main characteristics of good editing: precision, impact, and grace. So, I mean, without a certain degree of grace, which is very difficult in academic texts, I know, but without a certain degree of grace in the content, the readability of the content is not that great.
I'm going to ask you a question, but you answered it so very well. I was going to ask you both. So what's editing anyway? So you answered it very well.
Yeah. So I mean, do we have time? Okay. So I will just add that, when we look at our job as editors, we have to remember that we are the people. I've already given the analogy of the person who sharpens the knife to the level that it cuts exactly what the author wants to cut. So basically, we are the specialists. We are the partners who amplify the meaning, amplify the communication of the author, and that is our job. Now, a lot of authors, writers can go and publish stuff without using any editorial service. But why do they come to us, and why do they need to come to us? The reason is that only an editor, or rather the editorial process, will ensure that what you are going to convey to your readers, to your specific readers, gets conveyed in the best possible manner, which you would probably not be able to do yourself. And that is why I would recommend almost everybody. In fact, if I write something, I will hire an editor to have a look at it, because, even if you're not going to get it edited, having somebody to have a second look at your content or a third look at your content is immensely helpful. So yes, I mean, I will make a pitch through this video. If you are an author, please hire an editor, because without an editor, you're probably not as good as you should be.
Priyanka, any closing thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. I think I'll join him there. Definitely the fact that, so I was also, when he was talking about it, I was also thinking of an analogy of my own, that when we pick up a book, that's very nicely, so we go to a bookstore and we pick up a book and we leaf through it and we realize that it's a beautifully done book, seems to be written very well, the blurb is very nice, the cover is very nice. We go through the contents and we find that, it's very tightly written, it's very well packaged. We are only looking at the final product. It's almost like, when you walk into a garden and you see it's beautifully manicured and, there are nice blooms everywhere and the garden looks very pretty. You don't think about the fact that it has become as pretty as it has because somebody has spent a huge number of hours in weeding out the weeds, in removing the parts that were not as pretty, in removing the things that were not as sightly. That has what has actually gone into making the garden as pretty as it looks now. And I think that is what editing does to writing. It removes out everything that shouldn't be there, that has no business being there. And that is how it allows the writing to become as beautiful as it can.
So here you can see the difference in our personalities. I spoke about a knife. She spoke about a garden.
Okay, I think all of us have at least one thing in common, which is the imposter syndrome. Ruchika has a question. Ruchika, you can, feel free to switch on your video if you want.
It says, hi Priya, hi Anupam, hi Priyanka. It says that I cannot switch on my video because it has been muted, stopped by the co-host. Why is it so?
Can you do
Okay.
it
Can you
now?
hear me?
Can
Yeah.
you try again?
Yeah, I can. Hi all.
Hi, hi.
Hi, Anupam and Priyanka. It's so nice to see you both talking like this. And that coding part, it was such really amazing. I mean, it's very new to me. So why this is so? Just sharing that we were just like thinking about getting our son into coding. He is interested in this. He's just 12 years old and he's like very interested. And just we were checking out on a course last week. So I grew like all the more interested in this. Well, coming to the thing, when you were talking about that knife thing, and the earlier conversation which was going on, like how to be more humane to the author, not hurting his or her feelings or whatever. So how and what are the things to keep in mind or to follow when you are not in one-to-one contact with the author? Why you have got work from some publisher, say the publisher is dealing with the author and you are getting work from the publisher, you don't know who the author is. Now why I'm asking, so I was just editing a chemistry book. It was for lower grades, 6th, 7th, 8th. All right. And there were a lot of facts which were missing, the facts which were not placed properly. And I was outrightly straight in writing, now I would say that if I would have been the author, I would have thought, oh my God, what is this? So then in that case, how do you handle when you don't know?
Okay, this is a very old trick. This is a good question, and I will tell you a very old trick of mine that I have used when I am in a situation where I have to be blunt with an author, and there are issues, there are problems, and not just with author, with my colleagues also. Okay, so you are in a flaming, angry email exchange with a colleague, and you don't want it to become very ugly. So what do? So remember a few tips. Try to remove adjectives from your language. Are you getting me? Don't use adjectives like it is bad, or it is looking poor, or this is specifically wrong. No.
Yeah.
Try to remove adjectives. If you want to say something is incorrect, say it is incorrect. Okay. And the second thing is, try to keep the language as succinct as possible. Do not go into flowery descriptions of your, of the entire process. Try to use bullet points. If possible, use bullet points to convey what you want to convey. Number two. Now, the reason why I'm saying this is because your email may not get transmitted to the author exactly as it is.
Right.
Somebody will either copy paste it or fill in words into it. If you keep the email extremely to the point and succinct and bulleted, their flexibility or space to play around with the words reduces. Got it? The third thing is try to fill the email with as much facts as possible and not opinions.
Right. I supplement them with the references. Why I'm saying so, I supplement with the references.
So if you say that this is this should not be this, but it should be this. Why? Because of this. So here also a logical mind comes to play, and it really helps. You say, okay, this is what you have mentioned. This is what you should have mentioned. And this is why I'm saying is this because of this. So if you are, if possible, try to give external links, URLs, instead of copying and pasting into the email as much as possible. Sometimes it's better to just copy and paste. But if you give an external link, what happens is the chances of somebody messing your text reduces. So these are the three main tips that I can give you.
Something to what Anupam is saying, that this is really the correct way to do it. But what happens is sometimes, I don't know academic as much, but certainly when you have stories. So in that case, especially when you're probably a trade editor, something that has worked for me, which is a trick given to me by another senior editor, was that, so when we read a manuscript, right, and it's a story, and we feel that it's really bad or it had potential, but it was just poorly done, and we're feeling frustrated, you need to find out a way to just, cleanse yourself of that feeling. And what we did was we used to make 2 columns. The first column would be what I would just want to say uninhibited, fearlessly. Of course, this is not going to the author because that's not professional. The second column is what you would say from that, filter it out and see what is the most professional thing to say that helps the author. If it helps the author, then you retain it in your email. If it doesn't help the client or the author, then it's of no use.
So taking from what Priya just said, often what I would do if I'm having a quarrel with a colleague over email, I would type out the entire email the way I want to say it, and then start deleting stuff. And I would definitely wait 1 day before sending it out. Because by that time your temper cools down.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, that works. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Yes, Anupam, I have a question. Priya has been very kind. She hasn't asked you any difficult or uncomfortable questions.
Great.
But I'm not going to spare you.
Yes.
You talked about LinkedIn posts, and I have been reading your posts and have been commenting, and there is always a story, and the story is always very interesting. So the question that Priya asked on my behalf about how you entered the profession, that story has to be interesting. Would you mind sharing that with the participants?
See, the person who asked me that story is right now listening to this video, and I would happily direct everybody to please read Inderpreet's blog where I have mentioned exactly what the story was. But Inderpreet, with your permission, I will say the story here.
Yes, Anupam, please go ahead. It was wonderful to read it.
But I would still ask everybody to read Inderpreet's blog where I have mentioned it. Okay, so
thank you so much. Thank you.
The story is
yeah, Anupam, I actually asked that question because I read that blog, and when after you relate the story, I have a counter question for Priyanka.
Oh my God. Okay. So then I'll very quickly tell this story. The story is we met, and I'm giving bullet points so that nobody messes around with my content. Okay. We met, we fell in love. I was a freelancer, could not say that to her father because it would not have cut in those days. I barely made any money. So I said that, okay, I should be in a job. I got a job in Sage Publications because there was an ad in Naukri.com. In Naukri.com, there was an ad which only said good language skills and good general awareness. I said, okay, fine, this is simple enough. I can get into it. Even though I was a trained coder and my educational background is in international business, I was so desperate in those days that as soon as we decided that we have to get married, within that week I applied. Within 2 weeks, I was giving a test at Sage, and the next week I was hired. So that is the story how I got into publishing. At that point of time, I was, I was 30 or 32 or something like that. I was at the bottom rung of the editorial hierarchy. So my along with me, Jayantan had also joined. Jayantan is listening here, and we were kind of a pair in those days. So we joined the batch which was being trained, and I started off as a editor on contract. I was an editor on contract for a year there, and at that time I learned the ropes of academic editing, and from there I kind of grew. I was 6.5 years in Sage, and then 4.5 years in OUP. So that's the story.
This is pretty interesting.
Anupam, thanks for sharing. And you mentioned that freelancing was not acceptable in those days. But you have now, life has come full circle. You are a freelancer again, like for almost a year. So I would like to ask Priyanka, like, how is she reacting to the situation, and maybe how is her father reacting to the situation?
Yeah. So, of course, there is a good degree of embellishment on Anupam's part when he says it wouldn't have cut it with my parents. I think they were probably it was more something that we felt that it would be more respectable to have a particular kind of a job. I wouldn't say that they were the ones who really had that expectations, but yes, I think that is something at that point of time, especially when you are sort of introducing somebody to your parents. I think it just sounded better to say that he's working with such and such organization, right? But yes, it's been a long time. It's been more than 10 years now, and we've actually seen. And so if I have co-traveled that journey with him, my parents have also seen him go through that entire curve over the last 10 years and seen what all he has accomplished along the way. So we very well understand now. In fact, I think my parents would be absolutely overjoyed if he was to take another step further and actually start publishing firm of his own, because they are fully confident of the fact that he is ready for that now. So this freelancing is not anyway the same as what it would have been 10-12 years back. So that when you are ready for certain challenges and you are bringing a whole range of experience to it, then it's a completely different thing. And I think we are all very confident of that now, and we are absolutely behind him and with him to the extent that we can be, certainly.
Thanks, Priyanka. So Anupam, I think in the same interview I read about you wanting to turn a publisher. So can you just elaborate on that dream of yours?
I see. It's a very personal thing. Personal thing from the point of view of I think in one of the sessions that Michelle took, everybody keeps asking what should I charge and what should I charge, and that's a very common question. What you should charge is what you want to make, right? That is a very basic answer. Now, from my point of view, from my personal point of view, what I want to make and what I want to do are the key questions for me. And I feel from the point of view of building something, I am basically, you've seen how much I write. I write on LinkedIn, I write blog posts and articles and all. For me as a person, building something is extremely important. So for me, the first step or first thing that I would like to do really, excuse me, is to write something that is substantial that I can publish myself. And secondly, the secondary part that I would like to really do, and that this is again, this particularly becoming a publisher or something is more from the financial aspect of things, because ultimately publishers are at the higher end of the entire value chain. There's a value chain that includes readers, it includes printers, it includes publishers, writers, editors, employees, everybody. The publishers are at the top of the value chain, and that gives them certain degree of creative freedom as well as financial benefit. And I would like, as it's my personal desire to have that creative freedom as well as the financial benefit accruing from becoming a publisher. It is still a very, very vague notion in my mind. I don't know when I will do it or what I will do, but I certainly I know for a fact that I'm too lazy to go about it in the traditional editorial publishing way. So let's see how it goes. All I can say is that I've decided the brand name, and I probably will publish something of my own under that brand name maybe in the next 6 months or so. That's all I can reveal right now.
That's good. Like, you have given a deadline, because having a deadline is very important for any dream or any goal that we have in life.
Yeah. The only issue is that the deadline has been moving for the past several years.
Okay.
But now what has happened is that I've been working like crazy for the past 1 year. And now I think I want to take a break and invest a little more time on writing and maybe even publishing something.
That's very good to hear, and very many, congrats, Anupam. And I hope we can also support you, help you through the process, or maybe even after the publication of the book.
Thank you, Priya.
Okay, I think we can end the show here, Vivek.
Yeah, I see a raised hand by Gaur Sundar Saha. I don't know whether he wants to ask a question or.
Hello,
Hi, God, how are you?
I am fine, sir. How are you, sir?
I'm good. It's good to have you here.
Sir, the thing you are talking about, it's in the year 2008, I think, when you joined Sage Publications.
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
only on that, it is 2008 advertisement which publishes in the Ascent on the third page. Because on that basis, I applied for the indexing opportunities on freelance basis in the
Okay,
Sage,
okay. That's
and
interesting.
my first editor was Meena Chakrabarti.
Okay, okay. I remember Meena. Yeah,
So I think you also applied on that basis,
yeah.
on
Yes,
that
yes,
basis articles.
yes, yes, yes,
So,
absolutely.
sir, one a very small question from my end, sir, because you know that I worked with you in Sage also and in OUP also,
Correct.
because I do indexing, freelancing. You are aware of that.
Yes.
Okay. So I especially do indexing of social science books, humanities. Okay. So whenever a title of an economics books, especially economics, not political science, not history. So when I receive the book for the indexing, I see means few statistics or few figures which goes into the final book or the final proofs, which I think is very old, means 4 to 5 years old. Because I, as an indexer, in fact, I know the text also and know the figures also, and would like to contribute into that book also, that the updated figure should go into that particular book, because but I am not able to do that because the author is the prime, because we should not counter the author.
Yes.
But my thing is that whenever, because you says that, means all says that in our field the prime person is uh, reader. At the end of the day, the reader will read the book. So, is there any means, can't we tell the author, or can't we means update the author that means update this
See,
data or update this text,
I'll tell you
because
what.
it is at the final proofs or the final stage of the book. Indexing comes at the final stage of the book. So I think that might not be possible. But I, as a layman, but means definitely thinks that it the reader should be aware of the latest data, latest text,
Yes.
latest figures.
Gaur, I can give you a. So you have understood correctly that when it is in the final proofs, there is very less that publishers can do or even wish to do. Okay. If you think
Yes,
publishers
I know that, sir.
absolutely, if anybody thinks that publishers are flawless and infallible, then you're absolutely wrong. Most publishers, like most organizations, have a lot of inbuilt inefficiencies. Okay. They survive only because there is a basic need for their products, and increasingly the product is the demand for the product is also reducing. For you, if you feel very strongly about ensuring that the value that you're talking about goes into the manuscript, then the tip that I can give you is you point out to the production editor who has hired you that this piece of information that is going into the book is wrong. This is the correct piece of information that should go into it. This is the source from where I got it, and you may consider to put it into the reprint of this book. If as soon as you say the reprint, then what happens is the production editor will be encouraged to share that piece of information with the author and say that you have, Mr. Author, you have given this wrongly, and please, we may want to put it into a reprint. Now the problem is that the book may or may not go into reprint, but it is something what you say may encourage the production editor to put it into the reprint. They may just send it to the production team and say that please correct the proofs, and then whenever the book goes into the reprint, it will be printed correctly. Now that there is another thing. There are incidents when the information may be outdated or old simply because the study or the research was carried out long ago, and the proposal and the entire manuscript kept hanging for maybe 3 years or 5 years with the author, with the publisher, with the editors, and that is why it is coming out as outdated. And a lot of publishers are okay with it, but I have personally seen many times we ask the authors that this is outdated, or reviewers say that this is not good enough, please revise it. So that also happens.
Yes, Anupam, you are
So
right.
have you
Like, because a lot of time, like what the author is writing, he's supporting it with a reference, and the reference is old. So he will go by that reference, whatever statistics are given there. But maybe one option can be, because a lot of books also have an e version. So
Yes.
what happens is that the corrections are, or updated statistics sometimes go into the ebooks.
Yeah.
Because it's like easier to update. It doesn't involve that much of cost.
Yeah, correct.
Because sir, in my group,
Yes,
because in my group, means I talk to means lot of indexers also, because this is the group of copy editors forum. But I think I personally asked Vivek ji, because I also work with Vivek sir in SPI Technologies. So
Yeah,
I personally urge him to include also, because I would like also to learn the editing skills also. Means I also means for the last 15 days I also started few articles. If you see my LinkedIn's, so on different aspects. Right now I'm focusing on economy of India and sports, and basically I'm working as a librarian also in the minerals and mining sector. So I'm very much aware of what is going on in my country and in and around all the globes. Most means, so on that basis I means posted few articles also. So in that means I have given few means updated data as on date data, which I think if somebody reads, so the user should know the ground reality, where actually India stands and where actually the other world and global
I would have to
stands.
interrupt you here. I think we are running out of time, and there has been like a plan.
Sure.
Okay, thank you for your contribution here, Gaur, and good to see you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so I'd like to quickly wrap it up. Vivek can also, offer his closing comments. Thank you to both of you, Anupam and Priyanka, for being such graceful, people, and really giving us your time and your immensely useful and candid views. Thank you everyone else for joining in. This is really just the third episode. I really hope it continues into maybe another season. Thank you again to Vivek, Murugraj, and ICF for letting us do this.
Thank you, ICF. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks, Anupam. Thanks, Priyanka. And one piece of information before I end, I would like to maybe share with Priyanka. Like, although she's not from the field of editing, but ICF also runs a travel series. Like, we have had 2 sessions, and it's just to give editors a break from editing.
Oh, great.
So we have it on alternate Saturdays. And last session was with Dhruv, who spent like 400 days on a bicycle covering 15,000 kilometers from the Arctic to the Andes. So that recording is there on our YouTube channel. And on 24th of October, we are going to have Brigadier Hirak Kar, who went on a Java motorcycle. Like, he went on an adventure and then wrote a book, The Pillion Rider. So because that can be something your colleagues and friends would be interested in, because we would like everyone to be a part of our community. So that is why like we started this. And for the ICF members who are like hardcore editors, you can join us tomorrow at 11. We will have a session with Yatindra coming up, and he is going to discuss how to use MS Word for layout and design. So I hope, Anupam, you will be there, and others as well. So thanks everyone for your time, and see you tomorrow at 11.
Okay.
Have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.